right. Do you want to go ahead and go into our feature review of the night, which is of Shogun, the miniseries?
Let's do it.
All right, sweet. So like we always do, we're going to do a non-spoiler and spoiler review for this miniseries. It's a 10-episode limited series on Hulu/FX. Like I said, it aired February 27th to April 23rd, and the premise, according to IMDb, is when a mysterious European ship is found marooned in a nearby fishing village, Lord Yoshii Toranaga discovers secrets that could tip the scales of power and devastate his enemies. Showrunners for this miniseries were Rachel Kondo and Justin Marks, and it's based on the novel Shogun by James Clavell, which was previously adapted in a 1980 miniseries that starred Toshiro Mifune. The cast for this iteration of it includes Hiroyuki Sanada, Cosmo Jarvis, Anna Sawai, Tadanobu Asano, Takehiro Hira, Tommy Bastow, and Fumi Nikaido. So, Andy, let's talk Shogun. In non-spoiler thoughts, like what was your anticipation and excitement for it? And how'd you feel about it in non-spoilers?
Yeah, so I was very intrigued by it just from the trailers. I have not seen the original. I've not read the book. In fact, I'm not even, or at least at the time that the trailers came out, I was not even particularly well versed on cinema about feudal Japan or anything like that. I just always thought feudal Japan was an interesting historical subject. I love it aesthetically. I was a young boy once who liked pretending I was a ninja and samurai and swinging katanas. I loved Ghost of Tsushima.
Nice. Same.
Great,
oh my god, so good.
So I was definitely interested in it. I also think Hiroyuki Sanada is a badass. And yeah, so I was very interested. And then I had kind of made myself I'd kind of assigned myself a goal this year of like just consuming more Japanese cinema, not specifically samurai movies, but just, exposing myself more to that culture of film. And so when I realized Shogun was coming out in February, I was like, oh, I could like watch a bunch of other, classic samurai movies and Jidaigeki and stuff and kind of tie that in with Shogun, and I did. And Shogun was a really fun experience. I think I almost think I would have liked it better as a binge. Which feels weird to say because like I'm kind of tired of the binge, and I kind of like that we've gone back to weekly. But I felt like I want to say I really enjoyed the show. I had a blast with it. The ending absolutely sealed it as like great for me. But there was a point in the middle, like episodes like 4 through 6 or something, where I was kind of like, are we spinning wheels a little bit? But
yeah,
altogether, it's gorgeous. It's chock full of great performances, and I loved the element of it that's like, I loved how, obviously one of the main characters we're following is an Englishman who does not speak Japanese, and a huge dynamic at play is that he has this translator, Mariko, played by Anna Sawai, and she's not always the most transparent translator. She alters the conversations based on her whims or her needs or what she thinks is going to be better for the situation tactically. And so that was a really cool aspect of the show that I was not quite expecting. And it makes for some really cool drama that I enjoyed.
Nice.
So yeah, altogether it was a blast. I really enjoyed it.
Nice. I'm same as you. I haven't read the book, and I never saw the 1980s miniseries. So I was pretty blind going into it. And it's so funny you say that about binging it, because or like the idea of liking going back week to week, because Did not keep up with it week to week. Like I had
Oh,
this
okay.
whole thing where I was like when it aired, I was like, oh, I should do Patreon recordings for each episode because this is definitely in my wheelhouse. It's definitely good stuff. I'm going to get a lot out of it.
Yeah.
And then I just dragged my feet with the first episode
Mhm.
and or the first two episodes when they aired on February 27th. Basically, when I do Patreon stuff, I want to do like I watch one episode, record that episode, and then watch the next episode.
Yeah.
And so I kept spinning my wheels watching the first episode. I watched it a few times and I was like, I'll sit down and record. And then I was like, well, I'm really tired and I probably should, go to sleep instead. So I eventually just I just abandoned that idea. So there's no Patreon reviews for it, hence this full length episode review. But
Yeah.
I also just dragged behind and I ended up binging like the whole show in the last 3 days, I think.
Was it a good
In
binge?
preparations. It was pretty good. It was pretty good. Yeah, to be fully transparent, I finished the finale about an hour ago.
Oh, wow. Nice.
Yeah. And I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. There are some things here and there that I'm gonna have to work out my feelings, especially in the spoiler section, because there are
Yeah.
some things about it that I don't think necessarily gelled with me in terms of what I want out of this type of story. And I don't know how fair that is given that it's, source material, it's an existing thing. And maybe I just went
Yeah.
into it wanting something else or hoping for something else. But overall, I enjoyed it. I thought that the performances were great. Like you said, visually just gorgeous.
Mhm.
One of the things that really, really stood out to me in a very positive way was, and I don't necessarily have like the way to articulate exactly how great this is because I don't know the ins and outs of it, but the makeup, hairstyling, the wardrobe,
Mhm.
everything looked so pristine and like very appropriate to that era. And
Yeah. And
I s-
incredibly detailed too.
incredibly detailed. Like there's I can't remember who this was in reference to, but I remember there being like a tweet or something that went viral that was like, I don't buy, I don't know if it was Sydney Sweeney or it was some actress. It's like, I don't think I buy this actress in a period piece because she just looks like she knows what an iPhone is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um and like I got none of that in Shogun.
Yeah.
Um
Everything looks incredibly like, I mean, not that I have the historical perspective to say if it's authentic, but it feels every bit of it incredibly authentic
oh,
and
absolutely.
transportive.
Yes, and as someone who kind of came of age as a film lover, on this type of era, depicted
Mhm.
in film, and especially in Kurosawa movies,
Yeah.
like, I don't know, there was just something really nice about seeing, like, a modern production going to such big lengths to do a sprawling, like, massive thing and being so appropriate to the era that they're depicting in terms of
Yeah.
the way it looks. Because like, there were no blemishes that I could detect.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't seem like, I mean, obviously being in the West, we wouldn't see
Mhm.
as much of it, but it doesn't seem like there's nearly as much like really high production value historical, you know, like period pieces set in Japan
Yeah.
as there were like, yeah, in Kurosawa's day.
Yep.
So this feels very unique for the
Mhm.
time, especially like on streaming and that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that also that also does kind of go into some of the things that I wanted out of this that I didn't ultimately get because
Mm,
it was you know, expectations, or it was more just like wishes for, which I'll talk more about that in spoilers because that's a
yeah,
little bit spoilery. But
I think I have
um
some of that too, so we
okay,
could probably relate on that.
nice. But the thing that I really appreciate about it is the way that it is like there is a dubbed version on Hulu, but I
Mhm.
watched the Japanese language one, the subtitled one. And I had I listened to several episodes of the companion podcast that they put out every week with Emily Yoshido. One of the writers hosts it, but they were talking in the first episode about the way that they translated the way that they wrote the script. Basically,
Yeah.
it's incredible. Like, they had a writer's room of all English speakers, and they wrote it and then sent it to Japan to be translated, and then sent it to a Japanese playwright who is specifically like a scholar of this era to
to get it like
translate it.
Era accurate
Yes.
speech. Yeah.
Yeah, and the way that they talked about it's like the translation goes through like 9 different steps before it's even like the finished product, and I'm like, that is commitment. That's awesome. So yeah. So if you're expecting John Blackthorne to say like, "Hey, bruh, you're capping me on this,"
yeah,
that's
I love
the case.
Blackthorne's just the way he speaks and the way Cosmo Jarvis, the Portuguese,
Yes.
like it's just like
I
you milk dribbling. Like,
yes, I got into such a thing where like in my head, because I just live alone, I'm just like in my head and like in the shower I'll just randomly say like the Japans,
the Japans,
the Japans.
The way, just the way he says everything is so good. And I was, I don't really know Cosmo Jarvis outside of this. So when I watched interviews after having seen the show, his voice is so like soft and light and like almost kind of dopey in a way. Like, I mean, he seems like a smart dude, but like just the way he talks is much more innocent than Blackthorne.
Yeah. Oh, from what I've heard, I agree. I will say,
like bastards.
I feel like Blackthorne as a character, I'm a little bit conflicted with his arc in the show and how I feel about it, because it's presented as like a fish out of water narrative, which it is, but it's also like, it's like, the thing that I appreciate about it is that it is kind of eschewing the whole white savior trope. I don't know how much it's deviating from the source material. I don't know how the source material handled that character, but this seems like a very concentrated subversion of what you would expect from this type of story. So like, because of that, he's not very prominent in the show. He's not someone who's just going to come along and just like, oh, I can now speak Japanese. But there's a run of like several episodes kind of in the middle where I feel like he's just kind of, I'm a little conflicted, because I was expecting him to be like the main figure point of the show, and like what he is more strictly like the audience vessel for everything going on, which is good. We need that, but it also felt like if he wasn't going to be the focal point, then I wanted more of like Hiroyuki Sanada. I wanted him to be more figured, centralized to it. But then I don't know, it just seemed a little bit conflicting for me. How'd you feel about it?
I think I felt similarly, especially around the midpoint. So all of the marketing, I felt like, really leaned on Hiroyuki Sanada. It was like, this is a show about him being the greatest military genius or political genius in fictional Japanese history. And, it felt like a lot of the marketing was also kind of like hyping up the fact that this was Hiroyuki in a major leading role, especially in like a Western production. And he produced the show, I think. So I was expecting like full focus on him, with like Blackthorne being kind of a secondary character and Mariko the translator being kind of a secondary character, and it ended up being a little bit more of like a three-hander, but with kind of undefined ebbs and flows of focus on each one, which did throw me off for a while, because the first like episode or two are heavily focused on Blackthorne, and then the middle section is a lot more, I mean, obviously Blackthorne's there. They're all three present throughout all of it, but then it focuses more on Mariko and her arc and her journey. And then the ending kind of focuses more on Toranaga, which is Hiroyuki Sawano's character, or Sanada's character. And yeah, in those like middle 3 or 4 episodes, it kind of feels like Blackthorn just becomes a gag. And, you know, I've seen a lot of the memes of just like, you know, Blackthorn going to Toranaga and like complaining really emphatically about like how he needs his shit back and stuff. And then it's just Mariko translating like the Anjin is displeased. And like that's just kind of the cycle of like episodes 5, 6, and 7 or whatever. And Blackthorn doesn't really do anything during that time. He just kind of complains. But I really liked, I think the finale did like a lot of heavy lifting for me, which, you know, if I'm being totally fair, is still a frustrating aspect of any season of television, because it's like if you're relying on the last episode to do all of the delivering, then, you know, why am I sitting through multiple hours of this? You know, why couldn't you have cut this down? But at the same time, I did really enjoy Mariko's arc, and I think she's kind of the she's like the soul of the show, and her whole kind of relationship with death and and life, and kind of her traumatic past and how she kind of owns it, I guess, or kind of embraces the consequences of it, was a really interesting thing. And I think that helped me not feel as frustrated by the kind of stagnation of Blackthorn throughout the middle of it. I think my biggest kind of frustration with any of the main characters was that it felt like for the vast majority of the show, Toranaga wasn't really given anything character-wise. He wasn't he wasn't like given much personality other than being like the stoic leader. And he wasn't doing a whole lot because, and you know, I won't get into it until we're in spoilers, but like it's kind of because his whole plan the whole time rests on this idea of sort of sitting back and letting your enemies think blah blah blah. So it's intentional that he's not doing anything, but that's not an especially compelling thing to watch.
It really, and
again, well, sorry.
No, go ahead.
And again, just like with Blackthorn, I felt like the episode really delivers where it needs to, and it made me not feel as frustrated about it. But then when I do think back to the experience of watching those middle episodes, I still remember being like, God, when is this going to fucking go somewhere? And I love where it goes in the final episode, but it's kind of that push and pull of like, well, did we need all those episodes to get there?
Yes. Like that's my one of my frustrations with the ending itself and the finale is that it's not even, and that's where I'm conflicted with it, is that I want to say that it doesn't pay off on what's promised beforehand, but also what I think was promised beforehand is, I don't know how much of what was promised is what I was perceiving as being promised, like, and what I wanted to happen, what I wanted
and marketing too.
And marketing,
I think I felt like the marketing leaned heavier on the warfare aspect of it, which is like barely in this. There's almost no combat. What little violence there is more like execution style violence, not battle violence.
But when they do swing for those big battle things, whether it's like the cannon fire thing, which is so bloody and awesome, and some very choice sequences involving some people killing people with, you know, swords and other implements. It's very well done, very well choreographed, very well realized. It just is a little few and far between. But to go back to Toranaga as a character, and that kind of ever-present stoicism that he has throughout the entire miniseries. Like, I'm on board with that, and on board with him being this like political maneuvering person. Because like even in the first episode, there's the whole thing that's even talked about in the marketing, how like a man has three hearts: the one that he puts out to everyone, the one that only he knows, and the one that no one knows, or something like that. That's kind of like a thesis statement for Toranaga as a character, and I'm on board with that. And I'm on board with the stoicism, especially since Hiroyuki Sanada is so he's such a badass. He's so great. But when the show does things that would conventionally give that character a big push in the narrative face of things, like he does become more prominent for like a bit after some very significant things happen, but then it's just still like rescinding back into the background and not really, just kind of being the figurehead of the drama. And it just feels like they didn't really capitalize enough on the big dramatic turns that he faced throughout the story.
Yeah, I think I would have. That was something that I was. Yeah, I guess that's a good way to articulate kind of my frustration. Is it feels like so much of the show is just kind of relying on characters kind of telling you that he's a calculating genius, and B, Sanada's performance to just kind of convey, oh, this guy knows what's going on. But we don't really get to see him stringing out these brilliant strategies kind of until that final episode. And it's like, it's not that the reveal is poor. I think the reveal is really cool. I actually think like the way the last episode handles that is really good, and again kind of saves the show for me. But yeah, it's like there are so many, it's almost like a cycle. Almost every episode there's like a catastrophe that happens that would be like a major setback for Toranaga's clan and that sort of thing, and Toranaga's reaction is to just kind of like steel himself, and people around him are like, what are we gonna do? And he's just kind of like, the bird will fly and the sun will set and we are going to be okay. And it's like, okay, but like, what action are we taking here?
Right. Can we get a little bit more detail on this, buddy, please?
Yeah. And it's kind of,
that's where John Blackthorne has his famed, like, bruh, you're capping me right now. Like, this is no cap. You need to get off. Get off your.
And in that scene, I felt for the first time in the show, I could understand what the characters were saying.
Oh yeah.
It was when John Blackthorne started screaming about skibbity toilet that I finally understood what was happening.
I love it.
But yes, big agree on the kind of, I don't know if it's wasted potential, but kind of like dragging of heels on Toranaga's characterization.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's, I mean, I guess it is a little bit, I guess, informed by like what they're going for in terms of just showcasing the kind of how to phrase it, the differences between like the West and East, and like the like John Blackthorne's understanding of Japanese culture, and how he's like the way that that he is coming up against all of these different obstacles, like in terms of just not understanding like what the Japanese people like take into account in terms of like honor and discipline and obedience to like their lord and everything. And like, I guess that does kind of inform the characterization of Toranaga as a stoic person who's keeping all the cards to his chest or whatever. But it just felt, I think you kind of said this, like it didn't feel as compelling as it should have for me. In parts. Yeah.
And I think also the show kind of, there are a lot of other secondary characters in play who
Mhm.
have a significant role to play in like the plot, the technical series of events, but aren't necessarily like, we don't really need to know about where they're at emotionally, and we don't really get to
Right.
know where they're at emotionally. And so it's like, when your main character or characters feel like they're not getting enough, then it's like it starts to feel like a waste of time to follow a bunch of other characters that we know aren't, like Ishido, who's I guess the kind of the villain, the main
Yeah.
antagonist. Like I enjoy the kind of subterfuge interplay of like him trying to put Toranaga in checkmate, and Toranaga keeps kind of wiling his way out of it. But I
Mhm.
didn't really care about Ishido's motive or the the bad things that befell him. Like I never really felt compelled by him as a character, as an arc, or
Mhm.
Lady Ochiba, who's kind of another power figure that he kind of ropes
Yeah.
into his plan. A lot of that just didn't really grab me. So whenever we were cutting to that, I was kind of like, okay, when are we going to get back to the good guys?
Oh, absolutely. And like I think in the text, like in the actual show, there is enough there to kind of latch on
Mhm.
to Ishido, but I don't think the show does quite as good a job juggling like that character arc with other character arcs. Like there's whole things with that work oh my god, Blackthorn and Mariko, and like there's a lot of really interesting stuff there that becomes more prominent as the show progresses, and that's paid off well and done well,
Mhm.
but it's kind of at the expense of some other aspects like Ishido and oh god, I can't remember her name. You just said the name.
Oh, Lady Ochiba.
There you go. Yeah, Lady Ochiba. Yeah, and I just feel like the juggling act wasn't performed quite as well in terms of the narrative for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I will say I liked the character. Like one secondary character I really enjoyed was Yabushige,
Oh yeah.
who's played by Tadanobu Asano. And he's kind of like the weasel underneath Toranaga's authority. He's kind of
Mhm.
like, he's disloyal. He's kind of the snake in the grass who will go with whoever's gonna like get him more power. But he's charming in a way. Like it kind of
Yep.
he's very charismatic, and I liked that he kind of, it's not exactly a redemption arc. In fact, it's
Right.
kind of like a damnation arc, but like,
Yes.
but as he kind of descends further into his own selfishness and becomes more or makes more mistakes, I also found myself kind of like enjoying him, like rooting for him more to like figure out a way out of it, or figure out a way back to where he's on good terms with people. Um,
Yep.
and also his kind of rivalry back and forth relationship with Blackthorn was fun. Um,
Totally agree. I would say maybe my favorite like secondary or supplemental character. Or
yeah,
yeah, I think his arc overall was more satisfying to me than really most others, to be
mm,
honest. I was more interested in his arc, especially late in the show, and how it tied together. I think was really well done, but is another example of I kind of wish it was more prominent.
sure, sure.
Because at least the show kind of paints everything as like Ishido as being the main bad guy or the main source of conflict. And then toward the end, we get more drama involving Shige. Um, and I don't know. I just think that it would have been better if that was. I don't know. I just the juggling act of these different narrative threads was not to my liking.
Sure,
Again, yeah,
sure. Yeah, it's
yeah,
kind of, it's in this weird kind of space where it's not, I've seen a lot of comparisons to Game of Thrones, which
Mhm.
I think is both. It's kind of a disservice to both shows, both Shogun
Yeah.
and Game of Thrones, and kind of a misunderstanding of what Shogun's going for. But
Mhm.
I think something that Game of Thrones does a lot better, and of course it has way more runtime to do this,
Sure.
is balancing, like, making all of the different powerful figures around the
Mhm.
realm kind of compelling in their own way and having their own motive. And this show is way more focused on Toranaga and his cohorts, and yet it doesn't really explore Toranaga anyway, at least kind of until the
Mhm.
end.
Yeah.
And it doesn't give his adversaries the same level of intrigue that, like, you would
Mhm.
get in a Game of Thrones, where kind of like every player on the battlefield is equally compelling for different reasons. And I have
Yeah.
plenty of issues with Game of Thrones even before the final season, but like,
Sure.
um that's something that show did really well, that this show doesn't really do well and isn't really trying to do, but
Mhm.
also doesn't really come up with like a super compelling alternative to that kind of
Yeah.
multifaceted story. uh
Yeah, and I think the show kind of sets itself up for that comparison. And I mean, I'm sure this is source material stuff and everything, but just the premise alone of it being like, the shogun or the emperor has passed away, and his heir
yeah,
is,
yeah,
needs to come of age. So there's a council of of regents that are kind of taking care of everything, and there's infight like that. That's setting itself up to be like, oh, well, different factions
sure, yeah.
in a world that I don't understand as a white man in America in
Yeah.
2024. Like, this is Game of Thrones, right?
Yeah. Well, and it's like, on a literal level, yeah, this is a Game of Thrones. Like, it's a
Yeah.
gaming of Thrones, I get it, but
Yeah.
it's also just kind of like, they're
Yeah.
telling two different stories. And I think
Yeah.
ultimately the what this show is actually trying to do, rather than be that kind of grand political,
Mhm.
you know, uh epic, is, at least for me, the way I experienced it was a lot more about that aspect of clashing cultures and
Mhm.
being a stranger in a strange land, like Blackthorn's arc, and also that kind of. I feel like Toranaga's arc and Mariko's arc plays into Blackthorn's arc of, like, coming to understand the culture in the end. He's very
Mhm.
resistant to it the whole time, and it's not really like a, you know, um, racism obliterated story, like a, we solved racism type of thing. But it is kind of,
Right.
Blackthorn does have this arc of, you know, he's constantly trying to get out of Japan.
Mhm.
Eventually, over time, he kind of learns to adapt to the ways of Japan and embrace certain aspects of the culture and the protocols and that sort of thing. And it feels like his, without spoiling anything, kind of his resolution is kind of syncing up with the audience's resolution of understanding
Mhm.
Toranaga and Mariko and those characters. And I really loved that
Yeah.
aspect about it. I've been kind of leaning more on the negatives, but I did really like the show overall.
Nice. Well, we'll talk more about that in spoilers, because I do
Yeah.
have some things to get off my chest, and I definitely want to pick your brain about, especially the finale. So, yeah, I don't rate miniseries on Letterboxd because
Mm.
I want my stats to be clean, for
Mm.
movie watching. But if I were to rate this out of 5 stars, I would rate it probably 3.5 out of 5 stars, which is, it's a very, very good show. I kind of wanted more out of it, and I think that the my affection for it will probably grow, and I could see myself revisiting it because it just looks so damn gorgeous.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's where I'm landing on it. What? How about you? Out of 5 stars?
Yeah, I did log it on Letterbox because I'm a filthy casual. And I subscribe to the if it's on Letterboxd it counts philosophy.
That's fair. And just
Like
to be clear,
yeah, I'm not coming for you or anything.
No. I'm just because I am so neurotic, and I have like with the podcast and the year in review episodes, we do stats of movies watched and everything. And like I know that Letterboxd has said like, oh, we're gonna do TV stuff later in the year, and I'm like, I'm very eager to see what that looks like, because I want my stats to be clean, and if I can incorporate TV stats into that, it'd be great.
Separate, that would be cool. Because honestly, I agree. I mean, I know I just said I'm somebody who kind of logs everything on Letterboxd, but like if and when they do go full tilt into including TV, because right now they're kind of wishy-washy about whether or not like some shows are on there and they say their rule is if it's only one season then we'll put it on there, but that's not exactly true. There's a lot of anime on there that's like technically multiple seasons, but they have it on there as all one thing. And it's like what are we counting here? You know, Loki is still on there even though that's had 2 seasons, you know. Anyway, so I do think like when they go full tilt into including television, I would kind of prefer that there's a way to like distinguish it. I don't know that they need to be like 2 separate libraries, but like in terms of stats, if you could like filter them, that would be perfect. That would be ideal. But what did you end up rating this? To answer your question, I rated it 4 stars out of 5, which it kind of ends up being like a quintessential 4 for me, which is like basically I really loved what we got. I would have, you know, if I wanted to like really adore this show, I would have wanted it to give me more of the things that I loved, because like I said, there's a good stretch of this show where I wasn't really getting a lot out of it. The end kind of sells it for me, but it was kind of like, if you could have made better use of that real estate in the middle, then maybe we could talk about a 4.5 or something. Nice. Well, I can respect that for sure. Yep. Okay. Well, we are going to go ahead and go into spoilers for Shogun. So check the timestamps in the show notes if you want to skip around and everything. Those show notes are at obsessiveviewer.com/OV426. And to bring us into the spoiler section, I'm going to play a clip from the trailer right now.
There's a saying out here, every man has 3 hearts. One in his mouth for the world to know. Another in his chest, just for his friends. And a secret heart, buried deep, where no one can find it. What kind of man wields power in a land like this? The one with the open, or the one you never see? Will I die here? Likely.
Okay, so spoilers on for Shogun. Once again, it is streaming on Hulu. So let me go ahead and just say what I've been dancing around all episode. And it's interesting. It's interesting. So when I saw that first episode, I did have those like connections to like Game of Thrones, like setting it up as Game of Thrones. And I thought, like, I didn't need like a big political thriller interconnected thing or what have you. What I wanted and what I ultimately want out of life is not a 10 episode miniseries adapting one book, but I want like a sprawling, like multi-season series that takes place at the end of and this is like, even though I have an admiration for feudal Japan and Japanese cinema, this is going to be not quite like authoritative in terms of my knowledge, but taking place like a sprawling multi-season epic taking place at the end of the Sengoku period, like before the Edo period, like where this is taking place during like the decades and decades and decades of civil war in Japan, and like the samurai class and aligning themselves with different clans and fighting. Like, I want something huge like that. So when watching the first episode, I didn't realize that it was a miniseries. So after watching the first episode, I was like, I wonder if this is it. I wonder if this is what, like, is this what my like life has been leading toward? And then I realized, oh, it's a miniseries. That's fine too. That's good. But in the back of my mind, I just kept thinking that this story, this setting, this culture is so rich and is the, I don't want to say playground, but it is the playground. It's the sandbox to which many of my favorite movies, my favorite filmmaker of all time, is like had invested in. And I just want more. That's what I come away from it, is I just want more. So that's
Totally.
and I think that's where where I'm struggling with
your
this
kind of disappointment in it.
Yeah, like it's an expectations versus reality thing, and like am I a little bit disappointed in the show because it isn't the show that I wanted going in, or am I disappointed because in addition to that, these things didn't work for me? So I don't know.
Yeah. No, it's very much like, I mean, obviously they've said pretty openly, and I mean the source material is like heavily based on real events and real people. Toranaga is basically a stand-in for Tokugawa, who was basically ended the Sengoku period and brought about this era of peace in Japan. I think maybe my terminology is wrong, but I think he effectively ended feudal Japan, like the way that it was structured.
That's my understanding, at least.
And John Blackthorne is based on William Adams, who was a Englishman who went to Japan and became the Hatamoto for Tokugawa. So anyway, it does feel like, okay, that is a story and a period rich for expansive adaptation, chronicling the history of Japan at this time, and like, you know, so much political intrigue and military tactics you could, you know, realize on the screen. But ultimately this show, just like from my understanding of the source material, is basically just kind of like a microcosm of that. It's like, we're going to take that setting to tell a more, you know, I guess cerebral or poetic story about, you know, entering a culture and understanding a culture and keeping your cards close to your chest and that sort of thing. And I think on some level I agree with you in the sense that, you know, this show was such a big hit and was so well produced that I feel like it's kind of in pop culture kind of eaten up the slot for what could have been what you're talking about, an expansive multi-season thing. So it's like, now maybe nobody's going to make that, at least for several years, because they just made Shogun, and Shogun's about that, but not really, and super popular and successful. So it's like, if you were really wanting that kind of hurts, that it's like, so close, but so far,
you know, and like, you would think that would hurt, because I agree that is the case, but also the Dark Tower came out and I'll never see an actual Dark Tower adaptation. So like, so I'm well versed in this kind of disappointment. But conversely, someone could see Shogun and see the success of it, and then set out to make an adaptation and make imitators that are just completely shitty and actually have the line of, bro, you're capping me right now. That level of just that level of research.
They bring Cosmo back just for that.
Yes. And not to retread a joke I've already made, but just also like like, I love the idea of like a post-credit scene where Toranaga is standing like in a field, and then someone comes up and they're like, hey, there's this village over here that needs protecting from bandits, if you know anyone.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, then Anthony Hopkins pops up as a robot.
Yeah.
But anyway, what I got out of it, or what we did end up getting, was ultimately, it was satisfactory to me once I got more on the wavelength of what the show is.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say that in addition to what we talked about in non-spoilers with the makeup effects and just the attention to detail, also like in the actual, just the writing of it and everything, like it's so well researched, so well done.
Yeah.
Like even little bits and pieces, like the like highlighting the no theater, which was, from my understanding, it was kind of in the same vein as Kabuki theater, but for a
Mm-hmm.
higher class, for like the samurai class. Famously, Throne of Blood by Kurosawa takes a lot of inspiration from no theater. But just seeing that just like kind of got me very excited, and because I was like, oh, I heard about this type of theater in a commentary track for Throne of Blood. I know things.
Yeah.
But like just examining like a lot of the different cultural discrepancies between Blackthorn's understanding of the world and the world of the Japans was really cool, really well drawn, and the attention to detail was satisfactory to me. I just wish the narrative was a little bit stronger for me.
Sure. I do think I felt like although I made those complaints earlier about kind of the middle of the show not really making great use of the characters and relying too heavily on just kind of wrapping things up at the end, I did really enjoy the kind of the emotional thrust of the film, which kind of centers around Mariko and her basically I mean, like I said, her relationship with death and her kind of yearning to be unshackled from her very difficult and unpleasant life. I thought that stuff all hit really well and was incorporated really nicely into aspects of her character, like being a translator and being a poet. And her poem was really cool, and kind of how she's well known for her poetry, and the other characters are like, you know, kind of reciting lines from her, or are like, yeah, you're not that slick. I know she probably wrote that, and things like that. Thought that was really cool, and the way that even across the cultural barrier that stuff spoke to Blackthorn and kind of got through to him. I thought all of that was really cool.
Yeah, I found myself a lot more attached to the kind of romantic subplot between them, a lot more than I expected to, because I kind of felt like one of the strengths, and again, I'm a white man in 2024. One of the strengths of the show that I think is very calculated, and I say this having not seen the original adaptation or reading the original novel, but the original novel was written in 1970s. And I think they may have talked about this on the podcast in one or two episodes, but the thing that I'm drawn to with this is that it feels like it is a modern adaptation of what could have and possibly was a more kind of conventional Western audience story. And what I mean by that is, like, it's, you know, like the original novel, from my understanding, very much brought like Eastern storytelling to Western audiences. And like this particular timeline, this particular time in history became, I mean, granted, you know, a lot of stuff was imported from Japan before, but like, I feel like I've heard that it was very much, this was East meets West kind of story. And what I appreciate about that is that this seems like it is, I feel like this is purposely not putting an emphasis on Blackthorn the way that I think that even a couple of decades ago it would have, to make it
Yeah,
more
I mean,
palatable
it's
for audiences.
yeah, it defies several of the mistakes of something like The Last Samurai.
Mhm.
You know,
Yep.
it does manage to emphasize Blackthorn and keep him in the center as a main character and tell a compelling story about a Westerner in Japan without feeling like it's making it all about him or failing
Yeah.
the Japanese perspective. It is, I think that's probably one of the brilliant things about the show, is how tailored it is to a Western audience while being incredibly truthful to, you know, the Japanese history of it and the Japanese perspectives in it, like the Japanese characters themselves.
And the customs of the era and everything. Like one of the things I like that I think is maybe a little cheeky, I guess, is just like, it's not the show isn't about Blackthorn being like, whoa, you guys are crazy, like you're so different than me, you're crazy. Instead it's like they're like, we're gonna talk, like this barbarian is here. And like it's just like I kind of like that kind of flip, I guess.
Well, they both Blackthorn looks at like Japanese customs and the Japanese people and sees kind of savages, and they look at him and see a savage, and it's like both cultures are just kind of rejecting the unfamiliar. And you're, you know, through the narrative, like the plot events, the Japanese characters are kind of forced to develop an admiration for Blackthorn, and through the kind of his character arc, Blackthorn is forced to gain this appreciation for the local culture too. And so it's an interesting trade there without feeling like a white savior narrative or a overly Western perspective, and does that all while being specifically accessible to Western people, like clearly made for a Western audience.
Absolutely.
Which is an impressive needle to thread to needle, needle to thread. Yeah.
Yep. I had also seen a very funny tweet at some point that was like, I don't know if it was shared in our group chat or anything, but I saw a tweet where it was something like, watching Shogun without the subtitles so I can learn Japanese like this guy is, or whatever. And like 2 episodes later, it's like he's learning it a lot faster than I am.
Well, and you mentioned at the start of the episode that this show has a, you know, an all English dub, and I can't imagine watching this show dubbed. Like it eliminates so much of the subtext of it.
Oh, totally.
And
well, and that's the thing, like it's not necessarily an English dub, because here's the thing. When I was rewatching the first episode, when I thought I was going to do a Patreon review of it, like on one of my days when I was working from home, I was like, maybe I'll throw it on in the background, but I'm like, wait, I don't speak Japanese. So I threw the dubbed version on in the background, and like I appreciate 2 things about it that I appreciate is that one is that it's not fully like English dub. Like when the Japanese characters are talking, I think it's like when they're talking and Blackthorn can't understand them, it's still Japanese language, it's still subtitled.
Oh, but when it's just us watching Japanese characters talk to each other, it's English. Okay.
Yeah. And the other thing, and I'm not sure, this could have just been wishful thinking on my part, but I feel I don't remember. I meant to look into it, but I feel like Hiroyuki Sanada did his dubbed his own voice for the English track, which I appreciate because that dude's amazing. But before we get to like the finale and everything, because I do want to get your read on some things and kind of talk through some of my feelings on it. Let's kind of quickly hit on some of the big moments of the series. So the son's death. God, what was his name?
It's not Omi, because that's Yabushige's nephew.
It's a Nagakado. I think.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, his death, and then Mariko's death a few episodes later. How'd you feel about really Nakakado's whole arc? Because he kind of is this sort of not necessarily petulant child, but he is this eager to grow up kind of guy. Like he's kind of, I don't know if part of that is that because his relationship with his father is such a distance that he wants to prove himself, but he's not ready to prove himself, and then he ends up just slipping and falling and cracking his head and dying.
Yeah, his death was almost comedic for me. But yeah, his arc leading up to that, I didn't get a ton out of him. I realized, like you, I mean, what you said is basically, as far as I can tell, what the show is going for. That he wants to be his father's protege. He doesn't really have the skill or competence, at least yet, to do that, and he's overeager.
He's also easily manipulated.
Yeah, he kind of just winds up being like a thorn in everybody's side. He's not particularly rootable. Or likable or anything like that. And yeah, he just kind of makes things worse in every scenario. He kills all those, like, launches that cannon attack and basically starts the war. And yeah, I wasn't that compelled by him. I guess it's kind of interesting to paint one of your central character's own son as basically a foil to him, because I feel like that's basically all he is he kind of shows how not stupid Toranaga is. But it doesn't really make him a very interesting character. So when he died, I was kind of like, good riddance. Like I was sad on a level, just because it was like, oh, here's this young guy so committed to it, so thinks his dad has lost his mind and is gonna go take action, and like, yeah, that there's some poetry there that I kind of appreciated, but the nature of his death is just kind of like, whoopsie.
Yeah,
what a doofus.
Right. I liked that a lot, honestly. Like the method of his, like the way that he died felt like such an interesting foil, really, to the idea that's present throughout the whole show, is this, like, the idea of an honorable death and choosing an honorable death and doing like dying for a cause and dying for reasons. And then he's like the antithesis of that, in that he just slips and falls, cracks his head, and dies. And like that I found very compelling and interesting. What I didn't really like was that it doesn't really do much for the story. Like afterwards, like, we get
Toranaga's not terribly affected by it, because it's revealed he has like 12 sons.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, I have more sons. That's and like, I like that he at least had that one scene where he was affected by that, and the other guys, Seppuku.
His like right hand man.
Yeah,
I can't remember his name. I thought that scene was awesome.
Oh my god, it was intense. Yeah,
both that scene and kind of the aftermath reveal of like, basically he knew that, like, Toranaga knew he had to sell his enemies on the deception, even if it meant, making his friend commit suicide.
Wild. Hiramatsu is the character's name, by the way. But yeah, that was really intense, really well done. And I like that we had the moment where he was at his son's grave and he's like, you bought me time, you and Hiramatsu bought me time. And I'm like, that's cool. That's good. And then, spoiler for our discussion about the finale, I kind of wish we would have seen the fruition of that, aside from a flash forward, I guess. I don't know. It just, it was a little frustrating for me. But yeah, also Mariko, I thought that was a good conclusion to that arc, and I think that had more weight behind it than anything else in the show. So I really appreciated that.
Yeah, the way that Mariko's death and life kind of lingers over The final episode was really cool to me. Kind
Yeah.
of the deliberate use of her absence throughout several scenes in that episode was really cool. I was a little, and I guess this is a pretty minor thing, but I was a little like, huh, about her actual death, because it felt like I was confused as to why the saboteurs, the people going after him, would bomb the room.
I am so glad you said that, because
Because that
I
felt
was
not
kind of
the
in the
goal
same
of the
boat.
mission at all. Like
It,
Ishido basically like orders this attack or this
Mhm.
kidnapping, and it's like they make clear in the final episode that it was meant to be a kidnapping, and Ishido would
Yeah.
know that killing these people would start an all-out war, which
Mhm.
is ultimately what Toranaga wants, but Ishido wouldn't want that. Like he was trying to
Yeah.
stop information from getting out and stop that connection from happening, but it just felt weird that like his men would, oh, we're gonna blow the door open with bombs, hope nobody's
Yeah.
standing on the other side of this closet door. Like,
Here's my
felt weird.
here's my take on it, and this is just something that's formulating in my brain right now, so I don't know how accurate it is, but my kind of interpretation of that is that we have the scene where they're under siege, they go into the room, they're blocked in there,
Mhm.
they hear that they're going to use explosives, and I think two things. One is that she thinks that explosion, like, and they even say like that explosion is going to kill everyone in there. If they
Mhm.
blow open the door, they're going to kill everyone. So she's blocking it so that no one else dies except her.
Right.
The other thing is that she knows that her death will be what kicks off, the war, and does
Right.
this is the
Right.
thing that needs to happen. So I think it's twofold in that respect. But
I
in the moment, I didn't understand any of it.
well, I get that from Mariko's perspective. I get why she would,
Mhm.
throw herself on the
Oh,
proverbial
why they
grenade.
would do
I
that.
don't, yeah, it didn't make sense to me why Ishido's men would do such a reckless thing. Like it's not really,
Yes.
we don't, even if we'd gotten maybe just like a scene of
Mhm.
them that kind of articulated maybe their incompetence or their recklessness or something, and it would be like, oh, okay, that's the show's answer for it. But like, yeah, the fact that they were
I
sent to kidnap them, and I get why Mariko would throw herself on the blade to make the plan happen. I
Mhm.
don't understand why they would be using so many explosives to kill enough
Y
people, like to kill everybody in the room, when that's not the mission at all.
I agree, and
Yeah.
my counter to that is I feel like maybe that's the reason why they said like, "Hey, we're gonna blow open this door. We're gonna
Oh,
use
why they announced
explosives so that."
themselves. Yeah.
Yeah. That's my more, apology, like,
Yeah.
apologetic view of it, so
Right.
I don't know, but I think that it carried well, like, the aftermath of that carried well
Hmm.
into the
Hmm.
finale. Which, let's talk about the finale.
Yeah.
Uh, I wanted more. I didn't I wasn't that,
Sure.
all that pleased by it. The the visions of a future elderly Blackthorn, I did kind of take a peek at an interview that the showrunners did with Slate.com, which I'll put a link in the show notes. That kind of put it into better context for me. So the interpretation I had, I didn't know what the hell was going on. I thought it was just going to be like a
Hmm.
flash forward, but judging from that interview that I read, it's basically saying that this is a potential future for Blackthorn where he goes back to England, and it's a future where he doesn't learn from his experience in Japan. He doesn't give himself over to like the life that he has built for himself there. So in the future, he's an elderly man in England. His grandchildren are like, "Oh, hey, a savage gave you this sword, didn't he?" Um, and also in that he has the rosary. Whereas in
Hmm.
the finale, he as it's pointed out in that interview that I didn't really notice in the show, or I didn't connect in the show. He throws or he drops the rosary in the water. So that's a potential future for him. How'd you feel about that kind of interesting, like 2001: A Space Odyssey sort of vibe?
Yeah, I was also like, in the moment, I was also confused by it and just kind of took it at face value. The like, oh, we're just flashing forward. But I did notice him dropping the rosary into the water and kind of like had my moment right then. But it didn't register with me. I don't know if I may have read that same interview or seen some other article about it or something, but the kind of metaphorical level of Blackthorn's vision in the future kind of deteriorating as the episode went on, being an indicator of the fact that future was never going to happen, that didn't register with me. The only thing I picked up on was the he threw the rosary away, so obviously he wouldn't have it in the future, so I guess that was just like a maybe. But yeah, I didn't really pick up on that it was like an active ongoing dream that Blackthorn was having, and that dream was fading as his life changed throughout the final episode. So I thought that was cool. I thought it was really cool in retrospect. Once I kind of, read a little bit more about it and was like, oh, that's a really interesting way to do that. It didn't like wow me or whatever, but I did like that better than the idea of just it being a straight flash forward. When it started doing that during the episode, I was kind of like, this feels like it's kind of taken me out of the ending of the quote unquote present day, like the 1600 story. So I was kind of happy that it ended up being an unreality, I guess. So it was a cool framing device, even if I didn't totally pick up what it was putting down at the moment.
Yeah, I feel like it would have been maybe better served if it was introduced maybe an episode or two earlier.
Yeah,
it's
kind of an odd
to have
thing
it contained
to add it in. Yeah, and I think also, I mean, the explanation of it being basically a dream. We never really see any scenes in. Well, that's not true. In the finale, there is a scene where he like wakes up from having that vision. I guess that's true. I was gonna say we never really get the connect that it's actually happening in his brain. But I guess
I think that's the only time that it does. So it's open to interpretation.
I agree, though. I think a better way of doing it might have been like having one of those flashes every episode, or like starting halfway through the season. Then we get one every episode or whatever. It was a little odd to pick it up just at the end, because it doesn't feel like. I mean, we know Blackthorn wants to leave Japan and go home, because he says that over and over again, but there's never like an emotional side to it of like what he wants to go home to, or what he hopes to do with his life, or anything like that. So when it kind of starts those flashes of like, oh, he's a grandfather and he's got little kids running around and stuff, I was like, there was a disconnect, because it didn't feel like that was something that was set up or like baked into his character arc. So it was a little clunky.
Yeah, I think it would have been interesting, and this would have maybe veered it more into just like kind of cliched storytelling if they did this, but maybe after he and Mariko hooked up the first time, like have like one of those visions of the future. So like you think like, oh, did they have kids? And then when she gets all blowed up, it's like, oh, whoa, okay, no, she didn't.
That would have been cool. Yeah, kind of obfuscate the viewers understanding of where it's all going, which
Yeah.
it is still doing. It's just not
Mhm.
really attempting that until the last leg of the journey, and it's like, well, why do
Right.
it now?
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, but the resolution or the realization of Toranaga's whole thing is relegated to a conversation that he has with oh god, I can't remember
Yabashige.
Yabushige as he's about to perform seppuku.
Mhm.
Um that that was ultimately disappointing to me.
Hmm.
I liked the explanation that, like, oh, the Crimson Skies already happened. It was Mariko doing this, and this is what's going to happen now, and this is this and that. And like maybe part of it is just I wanted that big sprawling epic to be realized. I wanted that
Sure.
I was more invested in the idea of like a couple episodes before they're like, oh, he has to go back to Osaka to face certain death and to be, executed and everything. I thought like, oh, then the finale is going to be them marching on Osaka and doing the Crimson Sky thing
Mm,
and taking everything. Which is what the show was leading me to think it was going to do, I think. Um, and then ultimately just I didn't connect with what actually occurred in it because I just wanted more, especially because it's Hiroyuki Sanada. I wanted more of him. I wanted more badassery. I wanted more
sure.
uh, a a bigger showcase for his acting abilities that I feel ultimately we didn't get from this.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I kind of feel that in general about the show, that like we didn't get, yeah, the showcase of Sonata as an actor that I was hoping for. I will say though, I was not really disappointed by the kind of lack of grand epic finale,
Mhm.
because I felt like there's I think it's in episode 8 or 9, a conversation between Toranaga and Mariko where he's basically, he tells her that his like Hidetoshi or whatever, his like right hand
Mhm.
man, after he killed himself, he basically reveals to her like, all part of the plan. You ready
Yeah.
to do your part? And then I
Mhm.
was kind of like, I think at that point, and the fact that we were 9 episodes deep in the show and like no real action had happened, I was kind
Yeah.
of primed for that um sort of subversive anticlimax, I guess. And
Yeah.
so I didn't really mind. I was like, yeah, I think at this point, if we were going to get a battle, we would get one. Um,
Yeah, and
and I kind of,
honestly,
yeah, yeah,
yeah, my disappointment in that is probably completely contained to me as a viewer because because I mean, frankly, we had all the talk about Crimson Sky being this plan to take like basically sack Osaka. And then the penultimate episode is titled Crimson Sky, and it is
and it
Mariko's
takes
whole
it's
thing.
yeah, them in
Like,
Osaka.
yeah, like I kind of feel like I should have been satisfied by that. And ultimately I liked that episode. I
Hmm.
liked the conclusion of that arc. I liked how all that played out. Um, it just kind of goes back to I just want a big sprawling feudal Japan epic
Sure.
um multi-season story. So I don't
Yeah,
know.
I really
Yeah.
liked that, um the scene with Yabushige at the end, and I think maybe that
Mhm.
plays, it was just playing on my appreciation of Yabushige's character arc, and it
Same.
was a nice finale for him, on top of being a cool reveal of Toranaga's plan. I did think, I
Yeah.
mean, it is, on paper, it's like the classic cliche kind of lazy Hollywood, like, oh, and I had this planned the whole time. But it's
Yeah.
like, at least for me, it was like the best possible version of that. And maybe
Mhm.
that's down to Sonata's performance. Maybe it's down to the way they write the scene. And I like that it's basically, Toranaga speaking his secret into the abyss. Like,
Mhm.
they're standing on a cliffside. He's literally, he says,
Yeah.
I'm telling the future to a dead man. Like, or why
Yes.
tell a dead man the future?
Mhm.
That was a really cool aspect to me.
Yeah.
Um, and also played into the three hearts thing of like, yeah,
Absolutely.
it's Toranaga speaking out loud the heart that he will never share with anyone besides this dead man, which was cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I think on repeat viewings, I'll probably gain a new appreciation for it, knowing the full scope of the story. I do think it would be fun to, now that I've seen this version, go back and watch the 1980s version, and then after that, read the book, kind of go in reverse and see how I feel about it. But ultimately, I did really enjoy this. It scratched many itches that I constantly have with this type of setting, the storyline.
Maybe you should get that checked out.
I
chronic.
Probably should. I probably should
get an ointment.
Yes.
Instead of watching TV.
Yes. So yeah, I should. But any other thoughts on Shogun?
That feels pretty complete. I guess I will say the other kind of fold of my experience, which I sort of talked about at the start of the episode, was to kind of touring myself through some like classic Japanese cinema, which we can get to that. Okay. Yeah. I will say as for Shogun, really enjoyed it. Really solid. Kind of agree that, a part of me wishes it was a sprawling historical epic. A little disappointed that that's not what it was, but also really appreciated the thematic things that it was playing at instead.
Yeah. Well said. And ultimately I liked it too. So yeah, it was good. Yeah. Let us know what you thought. You can email me at matt@obsessiveviewer.com. But yeah, we're gonna wind down this episode. Crossing the felt roads, watching from home on my TV, looking at all my eyes can see. They tell me I view obsessively.